We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The 1960s marked a transformative era in space activities. But following the culmination of the Space Shuttle program, innovation in the industry flatlined. The government dominated the market and few large players monopolized the industry. Then in the mid-2000s, all that changed. Mass infusion of private capital jolted the industry into a new age. The private sector infiltrated the government's monopoly and drastically lowered the cost of access to space. As disruption expands existing services and yields many new ones, the industry is left navigating a rapidly changing and confusing environment. And that is where NovaSpace comes in to accelerate space clusters by acting as a connecting hub and facilitating an explosion of ideas.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the NovaSpace August panel. This month, we're focusing on a very important topic, and I'll leave it to our panelists to speak to the importance of it. But we are hosting three leaders of the aerospace industry in various sectors. They are all women, and they will speak to their experiences or challenges being a woman in the aerospace industry. After that, we will engage the audience and our online community with questions. So we look forward to fielding your questions as well as discussing broader industry initiatives and projects to be more inclusive of women in the industry. So we really want to kick it off with the panelists, and I'll pass it on very shortly to Becky Yoder of Surrey Satellite to kick things off. Before I do that, for those of you watching on itnow.tv, if you go to Innovation Pavilion's Facebook, then you will be able to ask questions live, and we will ask our panelists those questions as well. This will also be live streamed on the NovaSpace Facebook page. So we look forward to your questions and look forward to a lively and engaged discussion. With that, I'll leave it to Becky, and I hope all three panelists will be introducing themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aman. Welcome, everybody. Glad to be here at this event. Looking forward to our discussion with my fellow panelist here. Just thought I'd give a quick introduction about myself and Surrey Satellite. Surrey's been around for about 30 years. Our parent company is in England, headquartered in England. They decided about 10 years ago to open a U.S. office, and I was their first employee there. I started my career in public accounting, so I worked for Arthur Andersen for about 6 years. And then I actually stayed home for a while to raise my three boys. And after getting them settled into school, I decided it was time to start back in the workforce. So I did a lot of consulting for startups. That was kind of my specialty. Working for companies that were trying to get off the ground or had maybe been in business for about 6 months, but really hadn't got any foothold yet. And so I was able to do a lot of that from home and also go out of the home too. And then it was kind of a weird, strange events how I ended up getting hooked up with Surrey. I wasn't from Aerospace. When they interviewed me, they wanted someone with ITAR and tax experience. I had to Google ITAR because I had no idea what it was because space was the only industry I'd not worked in at all. I'm now our empowered official at Surrey, but I was in the audit division at Arthur Andersen, so I actually wasn't a tax expert either. But I had a lot of experience in setting up companies, and so that experience translated pretty well to Surrey. I did spend quite a few years drinking from the fire hose trying to learn the acronyms of this industry, which they still manage to stop me every so often. So I am the CEO currently and CFO for Surrey. And just to get it out of the way, in case anybody's going to ask me, the elephant in the room, if you happen to have read the press release about my company, Surrey, our parent company announced in the end of May or the end of June that they were closing the U.S. operations. And which was a pretty sad day for those of us in the office. But I can't say a lot as to what's happening, but we're working on a Phoenix plan. That's what I'm calling it. So watch the space for some news, hopefully in the next 30 days to what will be happening with us at Surrey, US. And so that's kind of my background. So I'll turn it over to who'd like to go next.
Doesn't matter.
All right, go for it.
Okay, I'll go for it. All right. I'm Hallie Walden. Despite what this says, that's an old LinkedIn title, but I am the general manager of the Western sites for the Space Access and Integrated Systems business unit of Moog. So I know that's a mouthful. Moog is a big company. We're about a $2.5 billion company, 10,000 people worldwide. So I am part of the space business. We also serve the aircraft markets and the industrial markets and the space and defense markets. So in my world of space, we build pieces and parts for spacecraft and for launch vehicles. So pretty much at least every U.S. and many others, spacecraft or launch vehicle that's ever flown has had Moog hardware on it. We build propulsion, probably best known for our propulsion components, propulsion systems, avionics systems, flight software, electronics for launch vehicles, thrust vector control for launch vehicles. We do mechanisms for antenna pointing and solar array pointing. We do structures, the ESPA ring and various other structures, and also vibration isolation. So sort of the structures and vibration isolation are the parts that fall under my Western Sites business unit. It's a big company. It's got a broad exposure all across the aerospace industry. I have been in the aerospace industry for a long time. I'm going to date myself here and tell you I've been in the aerospace industry for 30 years. I graduated from Stanford with my bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering, and then I went right to work. My very first job out of college was in aerospace, and I've been in it ever since. And I guess I might just take a little time talking about a few of the things that have changed, that I've seen change over the years in aerospace. So, when I first started, down in the basement they had a card reader. Anybody use a card reader machine? I think maybe a few people in here might have used one. It wasn't actually operational. I mean, it worked, but it wasn't being used at the time because we were way more advanced than that in the technology. We had a mainframe where you could enter your input deck right online or right on the console. So, so no PC on your desk. Pad of paper, pencil, in basket, physical in basket, where I would get like 2 memos a year as opposed to the 200 emails I get a day now. And there were definitely benefits to that. But you'd have to get up from your desk with your pencil and your paper and walk over to the mainframe and sit down and input your input deck and hit the transmit button to get your analysis run to go. And everything's Fortran 77, right? So I'm a really good Fortran 77 programmer. If anybody needs help, I'm here to help with that. So all those things have changed a bit. Smoking was really popular back when I started, and it was okay in the office. I don't know if any of you remember that, but if the guy next to you was a chain smoker, he might put down a pack or two of Marlboros just sitting right next to you in the cubicle. That was a little rough, so that's a change for the better. I think that doesn't happen anymore. Dress code was a little bit different, so all the men, button-down shirt, short sleeve is okay, tie. One of the young guys that I worked with when I first started, he got in trouble with the supervisor because his tie was not serious enough. Had some kind of wild print, so not only a tie, but it had to be a serious tie. Now, I was a woman engineer, very strange and unusual creature. So they all the male bosses had no idea what I was supposed to wear. So, of course, I had a little more latitude in my attire. I didn't have to wear the serious tie. So that was a bit of a benefit. And there were not any women leaders in aerospace back when I started. If we had had this panel, this table would be empty. And in fact, this whole room would be empty because innovation wasn't something we really even talked about or thought about back when I started in aerospace. And there certainly would be no streaming because there was no internet. So those things have all changed a lot. But really, the biggest changes I've seen by far have happened in the last 4 or 5 years in this industry. I'm sure you all are seeing the same things. It's an amazing time, I think, to be in the aerospace industry with all the changes that we're seeing. All of the entrepreneurs, the venture capitalists, all of the innovation, all of the new space, all of the commercial market is just exploding. And so it's really exciting. And people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos have made our industry cool again. Now, I've been an aerospace engineer for 30 years. You know, I survived 6 teenagers, so believe me, I know what it's like to be uncool. So it's really nice to be cool again. And the thing that's nice, actually, about being cool again is that the young people are interested in our industry again. I mean, you certainly see it if you go to the Small Satellite Conference in Logan, Utah. The place is overrun and has been for the last few years with young people, and it's just so refreshing to see that. And they bring with them all the energy and the enthusiasm and the innovation that this industry really, really needs. So I just think it's very exciting and a great time to be in our industry. And in addition to that, we have some women leaders. The vice president or the president of our Space and Defense group, Maureen, she's a woman. I'm a woman. I have about 50, 60 engineers reporting to me, depending on how many interns we have. Mostly advanced degree engineers. One of my very best managers is a woman. So, you know, we've got women kind of all up and down the line, which I think is a great improvement. But there's still room for improvement there, certainly. So I hope that, you know, as we move forward, we continue to value the sort of diversity of thought, the diversity of leadership style that you get with the diversity of gender. And I think that's going to help propel us to really move our industry forward.
Great. Yeah. Good evening. I'm Diane Dimeff, and I, in the interest of being kind of in full disclosure, I want to say that I'm retired. But I retired last year, and previous to that, I ran eSpace, the Center for Space Entrepreneurship, which is a partnership between CU Boulder, Aerospace Department, and Sierra Nevada Space Systems, and it was Mark Sarangelo who runs that. It was his brainchild, eSpace was, and I was hired to get it started. And so getting it started meant, you know, going out and finding a desk and a lamp and, you know, the waste baskets and everything. eSpace is was an incubator for aerospace startup companies, much like NovaSpace. However, eSpace was a nonprofit organization that was federally funded, and it also worked with, you know, almost pre-stage companies, stage 1 companies. They were really very small, just an idea would come to us. And we incubated 13 companies, and of those 13, 3 were successful, which is, if you know entrepreneurship, 1 out of 10 is a successful number, or 3 out of 13, especially in aerospace, is a pretty good number. 2 were wildly successful. And then we also had a company sell its IP to a smaller aerospace company, but one that had been ongoing for quite some time. So we actually had a great deal of success in terms of the incubator. We did not have a whole lot of success with this transition in presidential administrations. We have had some trouble getting the eSpace refunded through the congressional appropriations that we had originally gotten. How I ended up in aerospace is much like Becky, I think. My background's in math, and I went many years later and got an MBA, and then I ended up by accident. I ran MBA programs at Berkeley, at the Lead School, University of San Francisco, some others, and had done some consulting with KPMG for quite some time. What I did before eSpace was I was asked to help Carnegie Mellon establish their campus in Silicon Valley, and my career was primarily in either starting new organizations or programs or in turning around ones that were either failing or very troubled. And so I was asked, not because I had the expertise in aerospace, but because I had expertise in starting these new organizations, to help start eSpace. And the first thing I said was, I don't really know anything about eSpace, except I loved Star Trek, the first generation. And they said, that's fine, we're the ones who know about aerospace. So as it turned out, I ended up knowing, you know, a cocktail version of aerospace, and if you scratched below that cocktail version, I couldn't go too far, but I was able to hold my own in most kind of circumstances. So it was totally by accident that I got this, and I have loved being in aerospace. It's I've always been in industries that were highly male-oriented, and so I wouldn't say that aerospace is particular in the challenges for women, I don't think. I just think that there are challenges that we face that as women, both external challenges as well as internal challenges, who we are as women and who the environment is by the people who sort of run those industries, and we can get into that as soon as you'd like, Becky.
You can segue right into it.
So as I said, I think there are two different types of challenges for women, probably for everybody, but I think particularly for women, maybe underrepresented minorities, etc. But one of those challenges externally is being credible, establishing your credibility among, frankly, men who don't think that women or underrepresented minorities are really in the right place in technical fields and science and technology, engineering, mathematics, physics, etc. And really, the only way that I have found that I was able to get around that was to establish a long-running history of very high-profile, highly successful experience, because you can't argue with that. And all of that was really based on data that you developed on the outcomes of what you accomplished. And so really it's data-driven, it's outcome-oriented, it's knowing how to present ideas and accomplishments in a way that matters to the bottom line, that matters to the organization, to the team, etc. For women, I think we have a harder time waving our own flag and saying, we always say, well, I was a part of that team. Well, maybe you actually led the team and were the one who came up with the ideas, you conceptualized it, you developed it, you implemented it, and you maintained it successfully. But we don't tend to do things like that. We tend to say, oh, our team did this and our team did that. And I think sometimes we have to step back and give ourselves the credit for the things that we have accomplished on our own. So let me give you an example of something. I'm not one, I'm speaking to probably people who agree, but I don't do very well in agreement myself. I was giving a lecture to some graduate students at CU Boulder. As part of my running of eSpace, the partnership, I was a faculty member in the Aerospace department teaching aerospace entrepreneurship. And so I always hesitate to present my successes, my background, first thing. It just feels like it's kind of egotistical. And so I don't. I just start talking, and interacting with the students and everything. And at the end of one of those lectures, one of the students came up and said, we'd really like to know more about you and your accomplishments because we're not sure whether we should listen to you. Ouch. And it was a male student who said that. And I stopped and I said, thank you so much for that advice. And so the next lecture had all my experience in it, and I actually talked for a few minutes about that. And we just don't tend to be quite that assertive about who we are and our accomplishments. And then very quickly on the internal things, those are the things that we hold within ourselves as women, and some are really wonderful. They have great consequences. Some are not as wonderful and cause us consternation in our career and our work relationships. And the only thing I can say is it's really important as women and as men to think about this and to maybe mentor women, that we should believe in ourselves, that we shouldn't second guess ourselves. That we have a lot to contribute. We should be at the table. We should speak at the table and not just let the men speak, but to be really a part of the community as a participating member of that community, not one who is too afraid to say something. I have a couple of stories. One, I don't know if this is joke or if it was a psychology experiment or what. But there's this story of some sort about, do you remember in most of the old cars there was a manual handle to roll up the window? Well, what they did was they said, okay, well, let's have the man do it. The man rolls it up and the handle comes off. And the man says, this is a cheap car. This is such a cheap car. And the woman rolls it up and the handle comes off. She says, oh, I broke the handle. And so we internalize that we either must be wrong or we did something wrong. And men don't tend to be that way because that's not how they're brought up. The other really personal experience, and I'm telling a story on my significant other who is in this audience, one of whom is known. Becky knows this, knows him. So
I'll try not to point him out.
He
with my
likes, he likes music and TV really loud, whether it's in the house or in the car. And for me, it's excruciating. I mean, it's really painful to my ears, and so I'm always turning it down. He's turning it up. I'm turning it down. And we get frustrated with each other at times. And at one point, we're watching TV, and I turn it down, and he said, Diane, something's wrong with the ears. You really need to get them checked. And so, I thought, well, yeah, probably. And I dutifully go to an audiologist and I get it fixed. I talk to the audiologist, I take the test, and she says, your ears are perfect. And I got into the car and I said, excuse my language, crap. I did it again. I thought it was my fault. I assumed that I was the one with the problem. I didn't think, wait a minute, if you can't hear something, maybe you have something wrong with your ears. So there's just this, and the men's participation in helping women have that confidence in their own capabilities, in their opinions, in their participation in the community is really critical. Not interrupting them, stopping people who do interrupt them to let them continue their thought. Those are things that are really important. And as I think Hallie said, the more diversity we have in these organizations, the stronger those organizations, and if effectively it impacts its bottom line. So.
Well, my experience is a little different because I actually have the only male-dominated industry I've worked in has been space. So everything I worked in previously was mostly women. Public accounting, yes, we had men, but there was lots and lots of women there. Of course, when I was a stay-at-home mom, I was a mom with other moms, so we were dominating that industry. That's true. But I think of challenges I've had as a leader, and mine are the similar things. The feeling like I have to earn my respect versus just given respect because of maybe because I do deserve it. I shouldn't have to earn it, but. And the other thing I think is just feeling, and it's probably, again, it's more self-imposed, like you said, where you feel like you have to be better, that you have to demonstrate you're better, that you know just that much more, as a female leader, that in order to earn that authority and respect, and that, there's a side of me that always thinks, well, I do have to be better than my counterparts. And then I kind of want to slap myself upside the head. I'm like, well, why? I'll be as good as I can, but I shouldn't have to be better. So there's always this pressure. So that's more how I'm probably now. Earlier in my career, very different challenges because I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I wanted to raise my children, and I had been a professional, worked in public accounting, and I was a CPA. Had some really cool clients, had a lot of fun experiences. But when I had my children, I wanted to be home with them. And when I said that I was leaving public accounting, the managing partner of the office was like, "Well, why would you leave? Why would you just go home to do that? That's you're going to eat bonbons all day long and lose your brains. Apparently, is what happens." But I don't think I did that. But I might have eaten a few things I shouldn't have. But so there was this pressure to get back into the workforce instead of being at home and. I went ahead and stayed. basically until my kids were in first grade, because once they go to school full time, it's a little bit easier to balance things. You have a little more free time. I had a little, in addition to adult guilt about being a woman, I had a little bit of parent guilt and about being home and raising my children myself. But it's interesting as you try to come back into the workforce then, I think there's just this assumption that, oh, you haven't worked forever, so apparently your brains don't work as well. And again, I think that's something that not only women can help each other with, but men can help too. It's, that staying home and raising children is also an important job. It doesn't matter if it's the mom or someone else doing it, but someone needs to raise those people to be good little humans, and I chose to do that. So as I was getting back in, I really felt like I couldn't kind of start back at the level I had been at when I left. I started looking at some of these lower entry jobs, and you get these questions like, well, why are you applying for this? You're, qualified. It's like, well, I haven't worked for, 10 years. And it just took me a while to get that confidence back to where I was like, well, okay, yeah, I've been out of whatever industry for 10 years, but I haven't lost my ability to do finances and things like that, which was my background. But I did take it on slowly, because it was a little bit hard to leave that and then go back to being in office. I think now my bigger challenge is kids are all off. 2 have graduated from college. One's in his senior year. He sent me his intent to graduate form, so I'm pretty excited. One more off the payroll.
Free out that checkbook.
That's exactly right. It's amazing how much richer I get every time another one gets off the payroll. But it's trying to strike that balance between work. I tend to be a little bit of a workaholic. I enjoy what I do. Space is very interesting. And there's always a deadline. There's always something looming. But I love to get outside. And so I'm trying really hard to get out of that long work hour habit and get away and do some of the things I enjoy. So that's been some of my challenges. How about you? Any similar experiences?
Yeah, I'd say I had some pretty similar experiences. Certainly, there's always just a little hurdle to get over in engineering anyway, as a woman. And you don't always have time in every little interaction to give your whole resume. Here are my accomplishments. You can't do that. So, but you do have to. You do. There's always just that little hurdle. Every time I meet someone new, it's a little hurdle of you got to establish your credibility. You got to establish your credibility. You got to establish your credibility. So first of all, you got to be competent for sure. You have to be competent, and then you have to be able to display that competence in whatever it is, whatever you're working on. Back when I was doing analysis, I was really, really good at analysis. I was very good at it, and so it took no time for a, big, angry, gruff man at my, the first week on my job to figure out, oh, okay, she knows what she's doing. But you have to do that every time. And sometimes it gets a little tiresome, honestly. But you get used to it. And, and I know lots of men have to do that too, because a lot of people just don't really give anyone, the credibility until they earn it. But I think as women, we do have a little bit more challenge in that area. So that's definitely part of it, is every interaction. It's like, okay, you have to prove it just so that you can be listened to, which is the important thing, is because you do have something to say. You're guiding the strategy of the organization. You got to get people to listen to you, whatever the reason is. It's important that people do listen to you, because you have something to say that you think is important, and so you got to have that credibility to get that. Let's see, I had another thought. I was like, okay, that was just, one other thing that I think is kind of funny. So there are a few little tricks that you learn in this way. In our old office, we were right downtown Golden, right at the Howdy Folks Arch. You guys know where that is? In fact, my office was right at the arch, so if I got a running start and leapt out the window, I could have grabbed a hold of the arch if I wanted to. I never tried it, but I could have. But my office was, if people walked in the office, it was a really strange building, and the offices were all kind of scattered about, but the door next to my office was kind of closest to the entry, so people would walk in, and obviously I was the admin because I was sitting the closest to the door, so I would get all the admin questions. Fortunately, one of the guys who worked for me, a sweetheart, sat in the office next to me, and he would usually jump up if they needed, to have them shown around or something. He would help out, so he would make sure it didn't always fall on me to do whatever administrative task the person needed. So he was very helpful about that, which I appreciated. But so we moved into our new office. We moved over to the Course Technology Center, a really nice office, and I was laying out the office, trying to figure out who was going to sit where, and boy, I put myself not right next to the door. I moved in a couple offices from the door, so that worked out. We actually have one of our probably our youngest male engineers sitting at the admin station. Not because he's the admin, but because he likes sitting there because it's got lots of windows and lots of natural light. So that's actually worked out very well because we don't have an admin in the office. Also, if you're going to a meeting with people that you don't know and your group stops to get the donuts, and everybody's hands are full and they're saying, oh, could you grab the donuts? I'm like, I'm not going to carry the donuts in. It's a little trick. You don't carry the donuts in because then they're going to think, oh, that's the donut carrier, right? So little tricks like that. You got to learn little things. Okay, I would be happy. I'd be more than happy to carry in the donuts. I'd be more than happy to help with all the administrative tasks. But sometimes it's like, you need to get that credibility, and it's just going to be that much harder if you carry the donuts. So
I like it.
I think Becky, you mentioned, or I'm sorry whether it was Hallie or Becky that mentioned a number of women in the aerospace industry, and I wanted to, just like in 2 minutes, I wrote down a bunch of women that I know who are in the aerospace industry, very, very high level people. And is that something that I think Aman, you had asked us about that? So to start with, at CU, hi Aman. At CU Boulder, Penny Axelrad is the outgoing chair of the Aerospace Engineering Sciences Department, and she was the chair for the longest chair for 5 years. They're normally 4 years. They asked her to stay on.
She was going to join us too.
And
she's in Italy.
Yeah. She's
like
in
a
Italy
tough
right
job.
now. She's going down to she's on sabbatical starting in September, and she is at the Air Force Research Lab in New Mexico, and she'll be there working with their GPS group. She's an expert in GPS. Another person is Christine Larson, who's also a faculty member in the Aerospace Engineering Sciences Department. She's world-renowned in GPS, and she has won every international and domestic award you can in GPS research and their impacts on industry. And she just most recently won the Governor's CoLab Award for high impact research, and the award ceremony for that is October 5th. And that's for here in Colorado. There's a woman by the name of Deborah Factor-Lepore. I don't know if you know her, but she's like the strategy person at Ball Aerospace, works very closely with Rob Strain, who's the CEO. Heidi Hostetter, who couldn't be here today because she had, here's another challenge, mother duties and couldn't get a babysitter. So she's kind of co-running Faustson. There's a woman by the name of Kim Madigan, who runs Atomworks, and she was not available either tonight. You might know Kim, I'm not sure. There are probably upwards of maybe 50 women astronauts, and starting with probably Sally Ride, I think, was the first one. Our former deputy NASA administrator was a woman by the name of Davin Newman. I don't know if you have heard of her, but she was a professor at MIT, and her work was in sort of mission analysis and advanced spacesuit design. And you should Google her. Dava is D-A-V-A. And she's really a remarkable woman. Those are just people I came up with in a minute and a half or two. But
I could list my CO sitting out there.
Yeah. Claire Martin is a great researcher.
She's the chairman of the International Space Debris Committee.
International Space
Expert in space debris, sorry.
Is there any other woman who's here in aerospace? No? You look like you want to say something.
Yeah.
You look like you want to be in aerospace. And we already know, I can't see your name, but I know. Laura, you already had mentioned you were interested in it. So there are a lot of women really pretty recently who are getting into aerospace and adding a lot to the industry, the technology, the innovation, etc. And to the policy, frankly. Space and aerospace and policy is really critical, and women have been very successful in contributing to that piece of the industry. But that's a small percentage of the aerospace or the space industry workforce, and we need to continue to cultivate women, young women, especially in thinking about going into aerospace, because as Hallie said, it's cool again.
That's right. It's a movie.
It's a really neat thing to go into. So,
Yeah.
So should we see if there are questions?
Yeah.
We can
See if
chat
questions
some
before
more.
we keep talking.
Yeah. We'll just talk for the whole hour.
Anybody?
So I have a question. So Hallie, you had mentioned that most of the innovation has happened in the last 4 or 5 years.
Mhm.
And then Becky, you've gone from being a stay-at-home mom to coming back into the industry. And Diane, you had not been in aerospace at all. So what advice would you give to folks, whether it's a woman or a man, maybe they've been a stay-at-home parent or they're interested in changing industries, right? To get to that cocktail knowledge to where you can at least interview and be like, okay, here's what I bring with my expertise and here's what I've learned so far and I am ready to add value. Where do you go to start drinking from the fire hose?
well, for someone who knew virtually nothing about aerospace, I read Space News front to back constantly. Space News is the industry rag. I talked to people constantly I was part of what eSpace did. Besides being an incubator for aerospace startups, we had 2 programs, one of which was with CU Boulder, in which we funded graduate projects in the aerospace department that we thought had commercial potential. And so we incubated, I think, 5 companies of our ideas from them. And then the other one was we had a program where we placed non-aerospace workforce folks into aerospace companies in an effort to increase the aerospace workforce. It was really a workforce replacement initiative, because so many of we who are in aerospace are retiring now, but there's not the pipeline of aerospace workers that we need to get into the workforce. And so we found, or companies found for us, people who would not ordinarily go into aerospace, like engineers who were, a completely different kind of engineering, had never worked in aerospace before. My favorite story, and this is the kind of story we tried to find, was a tattoo artist who was a high school graduate and was Hispanic, and we found him and we offered him training at one of our aerospace companies, and he's still there after like 7 years, and he was his fine motor skills were really critical to this machine shop. And now he's got health benefits, he's got retirement, he's got all these things that are really cool. So so I got off on a bit of a tangent here, but I talked to everybody in the industry that I could talk to and just say, hey, I'm running eSpace. What do you know about aerospace? I wasn't quite that thing, but I would very specifically talk to them about the technology. I would talk to them about what the future of it was like. I would talk to them about how it's used. Are there any other parallel industries that could use it? I read the sort of NASA website quite a bit. They've got a website that lists all the innovations they've come up with that had commercial applications in other areas, especially in biomedical. So I was reading that. So, I could carry my own with even the aerospace folks, for the most part. Becky, how did you get it?
Oh, well, I drank on the fire hose. I was really fortunate that the folks that I worked with, the engineers, were gracious enough to spend time to explain things to me. We actually have a training class at Surrey called Space for Non-Space, and it goes through the gazillions of acronyms and explains to you about why the satellite doesn't fall out of the sky. And it was a great presentation, and so one of the engineers sat down with me that first week and went through this little presentation, so that helped. It was just little things. Mm-hmm. I have to admit, it was one of the hardest industries I got into because the acronyms just cannot be understated. I really struggled with those, and it's just technical, but I loved it. It was fascinating, and I'm probably a little bit of a nerd at heart, and so I just asked as many questions as I could. Anytime they were designing something for a new mission, I'd ask about it just to see what I could learn. And like I said, I had a gracious set of engineers that still to this day will put up with my questions and me trying to pretend like I know how to engineer stuff. So, and conferences was the other thing I'd say.
Conferences are great.
Going to conferences and talking to companies. It is amazing. I think you brought up like the cross-pollination that's coming from other industries into space. And we at Surrey use a lot of commercial off-the-shelf components, so stuff that's terrestrial-based that can go into space. And so you don't always have to have a space background per se if you're a good project manager and you know how to keep a schedule and a budget, and it does help to have a technical background, but if you have a good team around you, you can transfer those skills from project management in one industry into space. That's some of my advice. Do you have any?
Yeah, well, I've been in this industry forever, and I still have trouble keeping up
Yeah.
because there's so much happening. So yeah, I would second Space News is a great source of information, easy to read articles, easy to understand, but not, you can get through a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's a great source, and then conferences. I mean,
Probably a
that's
space for dummies somewhere too.
yeah, that's how you keep up with the latest happenings, or Space News and the conferences, talking to people and listening in the sessions. I mean, the National Space Symposium is certainly a great forum for more high-level policy discussions. Things like the Small Satellite Conference is good for more technical discussions, and then a lot of the new conferences that are popping up in Silicon Valley are great for what's happening in new space world and innovation. Those are really, really useful, so I think that's how I try to keep up.
And I was really lucky because I was on the faculty in the aerospace department, so that was like walking into an aerospace encyclopedia. So, and it was a safe environment. So, I'd hear something I didn't understand, and I'd go to that faculty member and I'd say, "Can you please explain this before I go talk to this company?" So they were really helpful. But the other thing is informational interviewing. People love talking about themselves. And so if you call somebody in a company that does something you'd be interested in doing, asking for an informational interview, I'm not looking for a job, I just want to find this out. People love to do that. They really do.
People
for
like
the
to
most
geek
part.
out. You're right.
Yeah.
What companies are hiring?
Everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the Colorado companies?
Yeah.
As far as I know,
Yeah.
everybody.
Diane, just coming from academia, what's the mix between, men and women in terms of the pipeline, like you said earlier? How many women engineers are coming on board in the next few years?
At CU Boulder, which is ranked number 8 in the country, which is pretty impressive, especially considering we're a public university, we're at about 30%, I think, almost 30%, not quite, which is remarkably high. And engineering is about that, maybe a little, engineering school as a whole is a little bit above that. But it's pretty impressive how many women, but the aerospace department has really put in a lot of support for women in engineering. The faculty are great. They care a lot about getting women into the program, keeping them in. We lose women at the end of the freshman year. We lose a lot of men and women after the freshman year. They say, "Oh man, this is harder than I thought." But for women, it's a little bit more of a challenge. A lot of times there's, men who are very assertive and very, can be controlling. When I teach there, I see women really hesitant to participate in their group, their team meetings, and contribute. They've gotten intimidated by men who already know quite a bit maybe, or at least show, have the presence as though they have that experience or that knowledge. And that's why I say believe in yourself. And I would pull the women aside and I said, you got to believe in yourself. You have to participate. If you don't, it's going to continue through the workforce, and that's going to cost you a lot in terms of your career progression. So we have a lot of women relative to other aerospace departments, but we still struggle with that internal stuff as women in general, and that's why having women faculty members is really critical. Now, I have to say, women faculty members, I think we've got, out of 30 maybe, 35, we might have 4 or 5, and Christine Larson's retiring, and that's a real big loss. So that pipeline that went into the tenure track faculty members had very few women. They're all about probably our or your age or something. So
Yeah. Got to start young.
yeah, you really
Gotta
do.
start teaching
That's
them
why,
young.
Men and women, if you can participate in STEM programs that encourage young people to go into STEM, not just aerospace, but to go into STEM careers, would be really helpful. They need it not just from we women, but also from men.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you guys think it's more of a generational thing, say 30 years ago versus now, between like the how men see women in like the workforce, or do you think it's still very prevalent that women, don't get as many chances, or they're looked down upon?
It's getting better, definitely. I think being a woman in some ways gives you more chances because you're, as a woman in engineering anyway, you're more noticeable because there aren't very many. And so if you are good and you do excel at something, then you do get noticed. So I think that's a benefit. But I also think it's, in general, not a benefit.
Yeah.
Because I know years and years ago, in fact, just a couple of years after I graduated from college, I was teaching a thermodynamics class at Cal State Long Beach. And I had some women in the class, a few women in the class, and I would ask questions. I would have people come up to the board. I would try to interact with the students as much as I could. And after a few of the lectures, or probably partway through the semester, I stopped and realized, I'm not interacting with the women. Why is that? Why am I not interacting with the women? This is not good. And I realized it was because they didn't. It was the boys who were in the front row. They were waving their hands. They were standing up. They were volunteering, and the women weren't. And so, even as a woman, it took me a long time to figure out, wait, I need to make sure that they're feeling like, they can stand up and they do have a voice in the class. And so then I would start, after that, trying to engage them more in the conversation. But it took me a while to figure that out. And definitely, I think the most important thing we can do is we put women in positions of leadership so that everybody sees that, and it's not when you walk in the room and you see the woman sitting at the head of the table, you can assume that maybe that's the person who's leading this meeting. When you're looking at, I have an open position where I need to hire my next leader, you don't just automatically, not even consciously, but just automatically ignore half of the population, or in your case, some small percentage of your employees, because there aren't that many women. But you just don't think. You don't even consider them mentally for that position because you're not accustomed to thinking of women in those positions, and that's what happens for sure. So I think the more women are able to get into leadership positions, which they tend to be very successful at from what I've seen, they make very good leaders, then the more it's just going to become the norm. And so when the position is open, everyone is going to get the consideration.
So one question I have is, you've talked about what women in aerospace can personally do, what can be done in academia. Usually and systematically, what can be done on the industry side or the corporate world side and the government side to be more inclusive, to make aerospace more inclusive to women and promote women in aerospace? Or what is going on right now, if you have any idea, with bodies or forums that exist?
I have some thoughts on both. So in terms of industry, I think it's very important for industry to reach out to academia about STEM. I had a meeting a couple of years ago with Raytheon, and Raytheon was really struggling to get women in their workforce, and we came up with a complete plan on how they're going to do that, at least through CU Boulder. But they also talked about the STEM things that they're doing with high schools and grammar schools. So allowing men and women to go out to the educational communities. Grammar school, it really has to start in grammar school, frankly, because around 5th, 6th, 7th grade is when the girls decide that they really shouldn't be so good at math and science. Allowing them to go volunteer in those classrooms and give talks about how cool the aerospace industry is, or how cool technology is, or or whatever it is. Help them volunteer to get people excited. Get them involved in hands-on projects. Women love hands-on projects too. These maker spaces, I don't know a whole lot about them, but I think they might be good. Maybe ones that aren't doing things like jewelry so much as things that are doing things like building robots, or designing a robot, and thinking about what would this robot do. Having them have those strategic skills, I think would be really helpful. Government, government, that's a harder nut to crack. I don't know.
I don't have a good answer for government.
Yeah. Government, tries to do STEM stuff, but we were just in a meeting this afternoon that talked about government's role as being a convener, and I really didn't like that phrase. Neither of us liked that phrase at all, because convening actually doesn't mean you're doing anything. You're just getting people together to talk about things, and that's not doing it. And I'm more of a doer, so if government could take on more of a doing role, and that would mean maybe they partner with industry to do some of this STEM stuff. Maybe they help fund K through 12 very specific STEM projects or STEM whatever. A lot of the hands-on stuff really is. It resonates with women, just like it resonates with men or young boys. If you have that experiential experience, you have a better chance of getting engaged in it emotionally, intellectually, etc. So having companies involved in that, I know ULA is really active with the teachers, he's really active with the STEM programs. ULA might be a role model for some other companies.
So, all three of you are in leadership positions, and I'm a believer that nobody really gets, anywhere without some outside influence, whether it's mentorship. I'll call it a mentor. It could be a parent, could be a sibling, could be somebody in the workplace. Could you guys speak to who that was for you? Whether that was somebody, Diane, you touched on it a little bit. If they let you, talk in meetings, you're sort of talking a little bit about that. I don't know if that was from personal experience with something that you had when you were younger. If you guys can just talk to whether you had mentors along your journey to where you are today, and if so, what were the things that were most effective in terms of what they were doing to help you advance in your respective careers?
Do you want to start? Sure. I don't know. I guess I can't think of a specific mentor, and I certainly didn't have any formal mentoring relationships, although I do recommend that for everyone because I think that's definitely helpful. But I think I've been very fortunate to have great bosses, without exception, throughout my entire career. And so those have functioned as my mentors. And I think that's been what's been most beneficial to my career.
Anything that they did in particular that
just listen to me
makes you call them great?
What's
so great about
it? No, they were they were. That's a good question. A variety. It varied from boss to boss, but they're all very supportive. Very supportive. Listened, tried to promote people within the organization and promote me when the time was right for that. And I don't know. I think it's really different for each individual situation, but yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't have a specific mentor either, but I strongly and highly encouraged anybody to have that close network of friends, colleagues. When I decided to kind of get back into the workforce, or even now as I potentially might or might not be looking for something new, just to have those, these longtime friends who can encourage me and kind of help you rah and help remind you at those times when you're kind of self-doubting and whatever, that no, actually you got this. You know what you're doing. You didn't get to where you are by accident. It's hard work paying off and showing results. But I just think having that those close, that professional and friendships. We call it the Anderson Mafia. All of us worked at Arthur Anderson at one time. It's a phenomenal network. It will be who I reach out to first, usually, if I would need to change careers. Because we seem to be everywhere, even though Arthur Anderson itself doesn't exist as a company anymore. So that to me has kind of been a mentor group. It hasn't been one person. It's really this group of ladies that I worked with at Anderson and still continue to be friends with them today, 30 years later.
I can't think of any particular mentor that I've had, but like Hallie, I've had some, not all, but some fabulous male bosses who listened, and who, one of the things I always did as when I went into a job, I say, here's how I work, is this going to work for you? Because if it doesn't work, then I'm probably not the right person for you. And one was, I don't do well under sort of micromanagement. I actually don't perform well when I know someone's a micromanager, so I would say that. And I don't know, they just sort of, I think it came from having this history of successes that they said, okay, we're just going to hire her and let her do her thing. And it worked. But I would always go to them for advice. And so I think I'd go into whoever and I'd say, I need some advice on X. And I'd get their advice, and I might go in one direction, or I might go in their direction. I will say one thing. I had a boss who was a micromanager, and it came out really early that he was. And it's a long story, but I went to him and I said, either you're going to run this program or I'm going to run this program. Which would you like it to be? And then he had a boss to whom I did not report, but that boss, we were in this meeting and a very important decision was going to be made about something. And I disagreed with the deans, it was a dean of a top 10 business school. And I said, that's going to cause a huge problem. And I explained why. And he said, we have to do this. It was a financial decision. And I said, you can't do that. And my boss is off on the side. And Bill, the dean, kept saying, I have to do this, Diane. And so my boss, Andy, says, Diane, back down. And I looked at Andy and I said, yes, I understand, but Bill, you really can't do this, and here's the reason why. And Andy says, Diane. And Bill stops and he looks at me. And I had the data and everything. I had surveys, I had financial data, everything. Bill looks at me, and I had known Bill's wife for a really long time. I was in consulting, and I had consulted with her on some things, so I kind of already knew him before I took the job. And he looks at me and he said, okay, we'll do it your way, and the only reason I'm doing this is because it's for you. And my boss was furious at me, and he wouldn't talk to me for ages. And as it turned out, it was highly successful. And so I was really lucky to have a boss who would argue with me and then say, okay, I still don't agree with you, but I'm going to go with you, because I'd had a lot of success with what I had been charged with. So you just sort of have to have that experience, and you also have to be willing to stand up and be counted for what you know to be true and for what you know to be the right strategy. And you may get voted down, and had I listened to my boss, I would have been, but I knew Bill well enough that I just decided to go forward with it. So,
I think we're getting the signal.
yeah.
And so we're getting close to the point where we'll be wrapping up soon, but we'll take a couple more. I got one question from the online stream, which is, what message would you have to a young professional? I know we've talked about this already, young professional in the aerospace industry, and I know one of our members here at Innovation Pavilion, their daughter is watching. So someone very young who's interested in aerospace,
cool,
and someone who's just entering the industry. What message would you have for them?
I would say trust your gut as a woman. Trust your gut, trust your instincts. They typically turn out to be right. I think women we tend to doubt ourselves a lot, and I know for me that if I can kind of keep that self-doubt at bay, that's a better way to go. So that's what I would say. And try lots of different things. If you're really young, you never know what you're going to like. So.
That's a great point, Becky. Your mind rationalizes, your gut does not.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Apply the 24-hour rule when in doubt and see what your gut says in the morning.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right.
Another thing, Diane, that you touched on a number of times is what I call performance-based information. It's not the tasks in the job description. It's not the dry stuff you write in a resume. It's what you do. It's how you perform in an organizational setting, how you get things done. That's what really counts. You touched on that, but I was an aerospace engineer in my first life, but I've been recruiting for the last 106 years.
It's your third life.
I told you 1,000 times not to exaggerate. And it's really critical. I just went through that with a man this afternoon who we're trying to qualify for a vice president of operations position. He doesn't have the electronics that my customer needs, but he's got all kinds of other stuff that's close. We'll see how they react to it. They may decide the electronics is a critical component. But he's got the performance information, having gone from accounting and finance to sales and marketing to director of operations. So he does have the operations experience.
See, Laura, that kind of answers your question from earlier.
I'll be happy to talk to you.
So I just had one more. I don't know how much time we have them on, but
I will take yours, and I believe the gentleman behind you has a question.
Why don't you go? Mine isn't a question, it's a comment, and from everything that I've heard, and I think it'd be important to add for what you've shared, I spent a number of years at Goddard in their faculty, working with their department heads on innovation. I spent 15 years at Johns Hopkins in the MBA program, very specialized in the intelligence community, policing, and security, Secret Services security. We were at the Secret Service Academy. And how I would start was in leadership, talk about that the competencies that are most important in leadership come naturally to women, and men have to work to get them. And I really felt it was important to share that with you, and you've demonstrated that, Becky, by saying that you asked questions. Men have this mindset that they are only win if they've got the answers. Women are willing to live in the question, not in the answer. And you also,
Very true.
Diane,
that's very
brought
true.
that up yourself in challenging. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you for sharing what you have shared.
Malcolm Gladwell says many CEOs are dyslexic, and the reason they become CEOs is they have to develop the people skills to attract people to teach them because they can't learn.
That's a good point.
Good point, yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Is that it?
Another question?
no, I was just going to say, so, Ahmad and I were trying to figure out what you ladies were going to talk about up here. And so we're going back and forth, and I'm like, what do you think they should talk about? He's saying something, I'm saying something different. But and I'm sure that, we arrived at this with some input from us. But if we were to try to, expand what we've done here today, there's just the three of you here, and talk about three things. Do you guys have any ideas what they would be, and how could one take it from just convening and to action beyond that? Like how would you structure something? Any ideas what we could do to sort of build on what we've done here, which is great, but it's small scale, but how could we do more or scale it, or so it was meaningful in terms of the outcome?
For the purpose of
recruiting
more women into,
yeah,
okay.
Absolutely,
Well, one of the things that I told my significant other, who is here and who I told on today, was that
is he still here?
is that I said, my guess is there'll be about 3 people here. And the reason is because it's women leadership in aerospace. And so I think one of the best ways of doing this is by, like Hallie said, is putting women in positions of leadership under any umbrella, so that if you have a discussion about leadership, there are 4 or 5 people, there are 3 women and 2 men, and those kinds of things. The modeling is really important, especially for the younger generation who are not yet entirely ingrained, except if you saw the students aerospace teams, and I don't mean just at CU Boulder, I mean in other areas, you see those gender roles coming out pretty early on, from freshmen on. So the more women you can put in front, the better, I think, in terms of activities. So that people don't see it, this is a women's thing, I'm totally not interested in this.
I also saw a recent study that said that the most profitable companies have very close to an even balance between the number of men and the number of women.
I don't doubt that. But I'll think about that very specifically, about more than just convening people, but maybe activities that, I don't know.
No, I was just trying to think. I might have to take that one away.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
One final
While
question.
you guys were talking about the rational side of how you approach that, you can talk about the emotional side. And if you want to do it in marketing, you have to hit something sexy and cool.
Yeah.
And you need some role models of sexy and cool women in aerospace.
Yep.
And that'll do more than all that other stuff to get people running in there.
Getting it, Dava Newman here. Really, she's
What about Gwen Shotwell?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Gwen Shotwell
Yeah,
would be
Gwen Shotwell.
fabulous.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very high-profile people. They're very accomplished. I mean, there's just so many. Yeah, take a look at SpaceX and take a look at.
Right, see, Elon Musk has made it sexy and cool.
Yeah.
But now for the women's side, see, you need
Yeah.
Well, that's
some people
Gwen.
there.
That's Gwen
That's Gwen.
Shotwell. She's the
Yeah.
COO.
SpaceX, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the
So
ultimate.
yeah, that's a great idea.
Awesome. So we'll start with Diane, come this way, but any closing words that you might have for tonight?
No, I'm
No?
just glad to be here. Yeah. Good
Thank
to
you.
see NovaSpace take off. and-
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you for having
All of
us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming, and we talked about a lot of different stuff, and we hope to continue this conversation further with regular meetups. One thing that I forgot to mention for the benefit of those watching online at the beginning is that as what NovaSpace really is, we call ourselves a launch pad for space innovation, and part of our model is to hold events such as these, to talk about these important topics, and hopefully to also participate and partner with other entities to actually bring some stuff into practice on a lot of different fronts, focusing on innovation in space and accelerating that innovation. So you can find out more if you go to Innovation Pavilion's website, innovationpavilion.com. And we hope to keep convening the community, even though we don't like that word, and convene the community, but also taking that further by taking some action on that. So thank you all for those joining us live, particularly to our panelists. Thank you so much, and those joining us online. Thank you all so much. Have a great night, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.